assessment and online learning. But some of our next ones that are coming up are academic integrity that we'll expect to produce this summer, and then authentic and higher order thinking in assessments in the fall. So those are some of our next ones. And we've got these planned out through 2028. So as we get started and thinking about what we want to do, we have a goal for today's session. And so if you can even be thinking about this already, identify 1 or 2 assessment strategies that you'd like to apply to your courses to support student learning. And we have a roadmap to get to that goal. And so we're going to be going through meaning and purpose of assessment, uses of assessment, integration of instruction and assessment, 4 critical practices, and some examples.
Right.
So as we begin thinking about our goal of wanting to identify some strategies that you would like to incorporate into your teaching, we have a little self-assessment to begin with and reflection in this Padlet. So if we, and I think Tina will be putting a link to this. Oh, fantastic, in the chat. Or if you prefer to use your phone, you can use the QR code and go ahead and take a moment to, you can escape out of that. And begin to populate.
Is it here?
Yep. Yes, this KWL. So if you're not familiar with Padlet, you can click in those comment boxes down. We're not asking you in that first post to necessarily comment this. You can really focus right now on the K and the W. What's one thing you already know about effective assessment and online learning? I'd like for you to think about that, about something that you already know. And then also, what is one thing that you would like to know about assessment and online learning? And if you're like me and might need some inspiration to spark your thinking about this, we did put this word cloud related to assessment in this KWL. That's what that first post is for. So if you take a look at some of those assessment related words, maybe that can help you think about, what do I already know and what would I like to know or want to know?
Right. And then at the end, we'll come back to this and you can populate with your comments something that you learned about assessment in today's workshop.
Yes, and so the third L we'll come back to at the end.
All right, so we've got a response from Emily. Assessment should be linked to learning outcomes. Sounds great. Yes, we were planning to talk about that a little bit. And how to effectively communicate assessment expectations. Yeah, I think that's a really good point that we can talk about. We have authentic ties to online learning outcomes. Yeah, okay, so authentic ties to learning outcomes. Yeah, I think what we mean is like maybe authentic assessments and how we tie authentic assessments to our learning outcomes. That sounds really good. And then how to ensure integrity in the age of AI. Well, that's something we're always struggling with. Hopefully I'll be able to give you a few examples of what I do. And we're always going to be fighting this, I think. So it's always an ongoing struggle. And then well aligned with desired outcomes, and then how to create more value-added assessments in the age of AI. Yeah, I like that. We also have dealing with AI, right? So a lot of stuff about AI. I think we're all interested in that. Maybe some of our strategies will help. So we'll see. Measuring engagement online. That's a good one. Universal design, can incorporate universal design. Yeah, that sounds good. Yes. All right. So we've got a lot of ideas here. You can take a look at them. We're taking a look at them. And we're using this not only to inform how we're going to go through this workshop, But it helps you kind of self-assess and think about what are you most interested in here? What are some things you'd like to learn? What are some things that you feel pretty confident about already? And this guides our practice. So this already is a type of assessment. What we're doing here, it's ungraded. Does it have to be graded to be an assessment? No. This is what we would call a formative assessment, and it's a really good strategy to keep students motivated and engaged in your classes. Let's go back to the slides. Here we are, and then I'll go to what slideshow from current slide, and we'll go to the next one. So do you want me to do this one? All right. So yeah, great. So meaning and purpose of assessment. Really, we should think about assessment as a way to gather data or to gather evidence. And that's, about what students' motivations are, what their personalities are like, what do they know, what are their interests, all those things. And then we can make inferences from that evidence that inform our practice and also informs our students. Really, when we think of assessment, it should always be to support student learning. That's the fundamental thing. If you take away anything from this workshop, it should be that assessment should support student learning. And how do we do that? We try to provide specific and timely information to both ourselves as teachers and to the students so that we're always up to date and working towards growth. Okay, do you want me to do this one? Or?
Yeah, I think you are the next one for a while. So.
Okay, well, let me know when you want to jump in. Okay, so there's two sort of types of assessment. You've probably heard of these before. Formative assessment. These are usually given during or before instruction to monitor student learning throughout a learning process, to provide ongoing feedback, to guide instruction, and to improve student understanding and keep students engaged. And then we typically think of summative assessment as conducted at the end of the learning period to evaluate a student's final mastery of the material. I like to cross this one out and say, really, there is only formative assessment. Even at what you would consider to be the end of a learning period, that might not be the end of a learning period for your students. For example, some of your students might not pass your class. And that's a point where they should reflect on their assessment. They should get authentic and specific feedback so that they can do better the next time around. But another example is, the students just want to know how well they did, and that will be helpful for their future academic career. So I think that really we should almost, even though we think of a summative assessment as being at the end of a learning period, you might say your final exam is your final summative assessment, always think of it as being formative, right? Always think about it as helping students to learn, right?
Yeah, this one, I forgot. All right. So one of the things in my my dissertation was on assessment, and so did I have a lot of experience and still a lot of continued interest in research in assessment. And one of the most important points to me that is like very practical and with whenever we approach assessment is, and something I keep in mind for myself, at any given time, students should know what they are expected to be learning. That's why learning objectives and communicating learning objectives clearly to students is so important as you begin even like your whole sort of like course planning and development. Mm-hmm. Two, how their achievement of these learning objectives will be measured. They need to know how their work is going to be evaluated. And that one of the ways to communicate that, and so that's on us to communicate to students how their work is going to be evaluated and their progress toward the learning goals. Rubrics are one of those ways. We are not going to be going in depth. We will be talking briefly about rubrics today, but one of our future seminars is on feedback, grading, and rubrics in assignments. And so you can be looking forward to that one in one of our like maybe 4th or 5th seminars. But students should know how their work is going to be evaluated or how their achievement is going to be measured. And then 3, they should know, and I'm just going to say it. They should know at any given time how they are progressing toward their goals. And so that means some like transparency in the grade book. They need to not be wondering, am I passing or failing? And so we need to find some ways to be able to communicate that to students about their progress.
Okay. So I guess now let's talk about these 4 critical practices that we're going to start with. Kind of sum up what's key in assessment. So number 1 is communicating learning goals. Number 2 is aligning assessments with the learning activities and the instruction, and aligning those with the learning objectives. And then communicating expectations before the assessment and providing timely feedback afterwards, so communication. And then finally, providing multiple methods and opportunities to demonstrate progress. Not everybody is the same type of learner, so there's lots of, you can give different types of assessments. So students that might not excel in one can excel in another. And also giving lots of low stakes assessments, so they have opportunities to keep going and keep trying in multiple ways. So the first one here, I'm just going to pull this up. Learning objectives. It sounds like from the Padlet there was a lot of knowledge about what learning objectives are already, so I won't beat a dead horse here. I have some verbs, action verbs from Bloom's taxonomy. So they're tagged by the level of learning, higher order skills at the top of the pyramid, lower order skills at the bottom. And what you want to do to construct a learning objective is students will be able to action verb and then the specifics for your particular topic that you're looking at. There's a acronym SMART. You want to be specific, measurable, that's key, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. Something that they can do within a certain module or a certain period of time that's not going to be like ongoing. There's no measurable outcome at the end. And so here's just a couple of those from my week 2 and my intro astronomy course on the sky, sun, moon, and seasons. By the end of this module, you should be able to deduce the location and size of an object in the universe from its parallax and angular size in the sky. Describe how the position of the sun with respect to other stars depends on the time of year, and explain how apparent retrograde motion arises from the orbital motions of the planets around the sun. So now, how do we get there? How do we get to those learning objectives? This is where alignment comes in, and I think this is really a useful way to build your learning objectives and your instruction and your formative assessments. Do it all from backward course design. So you start by writing a final summative assessment. What do you want them to be able to pass at the end of your course? And from there, you look it over and say, what would be my course level learning objectives? Once I've got my course level learning objectives, how can I break them up and write more module level learning objectives that work towards meeting those course level learning objectives? And then finally, once you've got those module level learning objectives written out, you can design your instruction, your formative assessments, and your activities, right? So that's a good way to think about how to build a course that where you have learning objectives that are measurable, that are time bound, that are specific, is to start with what your summative assessment would be. Okay, the next one is to communicate expectations before the assessment and timely feedback afterward. Maybe this isn't the best rubric up here, but I will explain later a little bit about my particular rubric. This is for a numerical methods in Python course, and I've used like a Python API that goes and grabs the student submissions and automatically grades them, and then provides feedback and stuff back into Canvas. So typically with a rubric, you want everything linked to a learning objective, and you want to have different degrees of like met the objective, on the way to meeting the objective, or excellent. And this one is more like a checklist, but that's what the computer program that I wrote is capable of doing. So I'm working on that. It's an ongoing process, how to provide better feedback to my students. But rubrics are a great way to communicate expectations. then timely feedback afterwards. For example, if you're doing like a multi-select type problems, this is an example from the recitation assignments that I built for physics with Calculus 1. And so you can scaffold these things, meaning in this case, it's one single problem, lots of different parts. Common misconceptions are the distractors for the multiple choice problems. You can see here that each one of these has wrong answer feedback that's specific. So this is incorrect because the difference was taken between the radii of the cylinder rather than the sum of the two. And then at the end of the assessment, it gives the full solution. At the end of the assessment period, for example, at the end of the week or something, students can reflect and say, is this what I did? Or was it, now I see what I was missing. So providing those solutions is really a good way to get your students to understand what's going on. Yeah, you have a question. Yeah, sure.
I have rubrics that are visible in the assignment area.
Yeah.
We give them detailed feedback at the end of it. And my question to you is, how do we get them to actually read those things? So one, I have students that clearly don't read the rubrics.
Yes. Yeah.
And then two, I have students who clearly don't read our detailed, and I do mean detailed feedback.
Yeah.
And we try to balance between giving them information and, not enough information.
Right.
Because we get that, we ask them, what did you think about your feedback? And some people will say, oh, it was too much. And then some people will say, well, I wish you had gone into more detail.
That's a really good question.
So,
so I think I have some answers.
In this because I feel like we're doing a lot of this stuff, but then the students
aren't reflecting. They're not reflecting.
Get that in because that's really what.
Right. So one thing that I do to go back to this rubric thing here, and this is something that's really only possible because I've got a built-in auto grader, otherwise it would be too time consuming, is they're able to resubmit as much as they want, right? So maybe once a week or once every couple of days, I hit the button to regrade all assignments, and it goes and regrades any new one and supplies the feedback into Canvas. And so if they're not getting the grade they want, they really are forced to look at the rubric to go and get more points, right? So one way to do that is to allow them to redo the assignment. Another way that I think is really useful that we've explored in Physics 1 under leadership of Zhangzhou Chen was to have them reflect on their assignments and say write an explanation of what they did wrong, and then get maybe half the points back after that. And so that's another way. I think it's a tough thing, but it's important to assign a grade to reflection, right? Or find a way to get them to reflect. If we just ask them to do it without giving them any kind of incentive, they're not really going to do it. Yeah.
So I do have multiple quizzes and things. But they also have writing assignments and discussions. And the writing assignments is really where I have the emphasis for psychology. So we have for example, just one class, but just one class has 125, and they're writing two page papers. So having them all resubmitting all the time would be a little bit challenging. But just really quickly, what I do have them do is after their writing assignments, they have another assessment, which is a feedback and respond.
Oh, great.
So what they're supposed to do is read the feedback on their writing assignment, and they're asked to describe what were some of the main ideas in there.
I think that's wonderful. Yeah.
And that is graded as well. I still don't know if they're actually reading the feedback because I feel like they're just copying from what the TAs wrote and just sort of.
So I think another thing that's important is to make sure that, this is a really hard one to do. You have certain learning objectives and there's certain stuff that you have to get through, but it's not assigning too much, right? To make sure that they're able to have enough time to get their assignments done thoughtfully. That's not very, So maybe it's beyond your course and it's at the level of I don't know, they're taking 7 classes at a time or something like that, and they're putting your class on the back burner and spending their time on classes where they have more assignments and stuff. So I don't know. These are complicated problems, and I don't have all the answers. Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah, good point. Thanks. Okay, so let me go through these really quick. We have the fourth one, which is provide multiple methods and opportunities to demonstrate progress. So formative assessments, pre-assess, what do you know already? During or after delivery of content, provide a prompt to engage students and reinforce their learning. Assess frequently with low stakes, and assess frequently with no stakes, right? So you can have assessments that are not graded at all, and students feel a lot more comfortable engaging with the material like that, and they might reflect a little bit more on those short-term, kind of short, easy things to do. Okay, so let me.
I have a question about that.
Sure.
I subscribe to the assessing frequently, low stakes, particularly in in particular in an online class. I get a lot of complaints that there is too much busy work. How do you?
Right.
How do you? How do I deal with that?
Right. So yeah, I get that complaint too in my intro astronomy class, that there's too much busy work. I think really what it boils down to is trying to decide, like, how can I make this as smooth as possible. If it's a low stakes assignment, for example, just a quick quiz that is after a lecture, recorded lecture or something like that, then just make it so that the questions are easy to read. It's not cheatability is not a problem for low or no stakes assignments. So don't try to make it a difficult process to answer the questions. Make it easy. Make it free flowing, not too wordy. I don't know. That's what I would suggest.
And I would just add to
Yeah.
that, help remind students how these activities are tied to their achievement of the module objectives and course objectives. Help them to see, if they're not seeing the relevance, if they feel it's busy work, then help communicate that to students, the purpose for it.
Right. Also, I have to say, I really like graded assignments too, because a grade is a form of communication. You can when a student gets a poor grade, it's kind of a red flag of, I should probably go talk to the professor, find out what I'm having a hard time with. And if you have it to where you have a policy where they can earn back points or something like that, that's a really good way to open the door to get them to come to you. And maybe then you can reduce a little bit of the workload. It's a tough. I don't really have the answers here. How do we balance between meeting our course objectives and making sure that it's not too much of a load on the students? It's always really hard to do, but it's something we have to be thoughtful about, I think. Okay. So I'm going to skip a little ahead in the slides and just go to some examples now. So some examples of authentic assessment. These are the type of things that really allow a student to be like a little bit of imaginative or creative, and as opposed to like multiple choice or multi-select or something like that. So reflections, like we're talking about, that's a really great way, written or spoken. Presentations and demonstrations, projects, service learning assignments, portfolios of work, game-based activities and role-playing, debates and discussions. An example that I use is in my solar system astronomy class. After we've gone through the majority of the course and covered the majority of the course level learning objectives, we do a role-playing game where essentially there are a bunch of scientists that are principal investigators on a spacecraft. I worked on the Cassini mission to Saturn for 13 years, and so I know that particular spacecraft really well. So I give them that as a model, and so some of them will have different instruments. The camera, the imaging subsystem, the ultraviolet imaging spectrograph, the magnetometer, and they have to write their science objectives as a team, and then they write their measurements. And this is a flyby of an exoplanet, Proxima b. And so there's only one go, and they roll the dice, and sometimes instruments get lost. There's no longer a camera on the spacecraft. How can you collaborate to get those observations that you wanted to see if Proxima b had a moon or a ring system or whatever? And I think this is super engaging for students, and I learn a lot about what they know and what their interests are by doing it. So games, especially like role-playing games, can go a long way, I think. In a large class, this is hard to do, right? This is a class of, usually I have 20 to 30 students, so that's not too bad. But you could, for example, do this and break up into individual groups. You can put assignment groups together in Canvas and do something like that, but it's not easy. And then what about select response assessments? This is from my online intro astronomy class. There's always a cheatability factor here, and as AI is getting better and better, it's getting harder and harder. But something that I did a few semesters ago was I created assessment banks of isomorphic questions, each tagged to a particular learning objective. So for example, here you can see 3 questions here. Which position in this diagram represents the Earth on the day that Tokyo, Japan experiences the longest day or whatever? And the next one, which position in this diagram represents Earth on the day when the sun reaches its highest point in Cape Town, South Africa? And so they're all assessing the same learning outcome, but each student will get a random version of this in their test. So this is a really good way to prevent cheating in assessment, to also be able to provide feedback. And what I've done with this that I'm actually really proud of is they have a practice exam, which is the exam for each of their exams. And they can take it as many times as they want. But every time they're getting a random iteration of that. So no 2 student gets the same thing. Really, they might go through it 1,000 times. Thanks. They might go through it 1,000 times, and the thing is, if you did that and you didn't do any of the other assignments, you still learn the material, right? And so students are very happy with this. The questions are difficult. I like to give a multi-select instead of multiple choice, and I'll show an example of that, I think, in a little bit. And that makes it a little bit harder to cheat. So when you have multiple correct answers instead of just one, I recommend that. Also scaffolded items, when you have part A, part B, part C, even if they're multiple choice or multi-select, those can move beyond the simple recall to higher order learning skills. Okay, so for feedback after assessment, here's an example of some of the feedback that I would provide from my automated grader. For my Python class, function did not return the right output, function did not take the right input, no function name displacement. And so this is a work in progress. I've only started this like 1 semester ago. And so the rubrics need some work, but as it works right now, the rubrics in Canvas are downloaded from the Canvas API into Python. So if I make a change to the rubric, it changes the program and it changes how the program grades. So it's all tagged, it's all in Canvas already, and any changes automatically propagate, and that changes like the number of points that they get, for example. And the feedback is something I have to hardwire in there, but that's, I think, pretty useful. Okay. The other thing that I think is important when you're grading on a rubric is adding some positive feedback. Students stay much more motivated, I think we all do, when we hear something like, I really like how your creative solution to the sorting algorithm, very imaginative. It's not just, this is what you did wrong. These are some things that you did well, right? And to put their mind on that, I think, is really important. Yeah. Okay, so of course, this is a workshop on assessment, so I have to put an assessment in here and just demonstrate some of those things. And we don't have a lot of time. We have like 3 minutes left. So here's a question, a multiple choice question. I've got some learning objectives. Which of the following statements about assessment is true? The main purpose of assessment is to assign grades to students. Formative assessments are low-stakes tools that support learning during instruction. Assessment should only occur at the end of a unit to measure learning outcomes, or multiple choice tests are always the most objective and effective way to assess understanding.
I'd like to invite participants, our online participants, to maybe share some of your responses in the chat.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to go ahead.
Yep.
And so this is a good way for multiple choice to provide feedback, right? Yep, good. And there it is. So then providing some additional comments on top of that. It's not about grading. It's about identifying where students are in their understanding so teachers can adjust instruction and students can reflect and improve. Or look at the first one. This is a common misconception. While grades are one function of assessment, the primary purpose, especially in formative contexts, is to support and inform learning. So giving them the feedback that they need to do better on the next round. Here's another question. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but this one is select all that apply. Which of the following are key principles of effective assessment and teaching? We have a set of learning objectives that might be in the instruction, but the students know what they're going to be assessed on in this particular module. And then we provide feedback. Sorry, go ahead. For question 2? Right, yeah. I think that was a joke. Yeah. Right. Should never support student learning. You don't want that, yeah. Right. Right. So this is a way to provide feedback. I think this is a good way to curb cheating a little bit. It's much harder to copy and paste all this into ChatGPT and get an answer out than if it was just one multiple choice question. But again, ChatGPT is getting better and better every day. And so it's always going to be, what can we do to fight that? Here's an example of an authentic assessment. And keep in mind, so this is a prompt, discuss the challenges and strategies associated with assessing student learning in an online teaching environment. And then at the end it says, use specific examples or experiences to support your ideas. That's a good idea to help curb people from using ChatGPT. You want to have something authentic, something that's about them in there, and also specifics, right? GPT is not that good at providing specifics. So then you have a rubric, right? And this is a better example of a rubric where you have, for example, identification of challenges, not evident, needs work, good, or excellent. And you tell them what that means. What is excellent? Clearly identifies and explains multiple relevant challenges in online assessment. What is needs work? It's vague or it's incomplete mention of challenges, right? Okay. And then I just had ChatGPT write a response. So this is GPT's authentic response. And this is what would be like a B-level response. So keep that in mind. ChatGPT provides a kind of a B-level response here. And what are the things that we can do to provide feedback? Number one, we can assign a grade. So I say 12 out of 15 points, this is an 80%. And the student does get some information about that, and it opens a door to communication, right? So if I'm very happy to give zeros, I'm happy to give very low scores on my assessments, and then say, well, you can come talk to me and redo it, right? And that's a way to get them to think about it and say, oh, okay, I need to do better. I can't afford to have a 0 on this assignment. It's like, well, you don't have to have a 0. You can stay with a 0 if you don't put some more effort into it. But if you're willing to come talk to me and find out what you need to do better, then resubmit. Then we have our rubric, and it identifies exactly what was lacking. So for example, in 2 through 4, suggest solid strategies, open-ended questions, forums, rubrics, but with limited detail. Academic integrity addresses it with some effective ideas, question types and randomization, but not deeply explored, right? And then finally, add some positive feedback and some authentic response yourself, right? So you did a great job identifying key challenges in online assessment and offering practical strategies. To improve, try expanding on these strategies, how these strategies impact your work, and solid work. You're thinking critically and applying useful approaches. So some good stuff, some authentic, honest stuff there, but mixing it all together gives them the motivation to continue, right? And also the motivation to reflect, right? That's the other thing. We want them to reflect on this stuff. So there's a little bit of like, if you provide a little bit of complimentary feedback, then they're more likely to go back and read their feedback, right? So okay, so that's the end of it. I'm just gonna go to, here's our references, and oh, what happened to the question and responses slide? That disappeared. We were just.
We can. Well, we'll do
whatever.
responses, but would you leave it on the wrap up so people can see?
Oh, okay, sure.
And so instead of like repeating. Sorry, now my mic is on. As we have some questions, time for questions and responses, we'll leave up our wrap-up slide.
Sounds good.
That's sort of like, this is what we'd really like for you to be thinking about and taking away. And also, you can be going back to the KWL and maybe providing some of your responses and maybe something that you have learned today.
Yeah, that would be great for us because we want to reflect on how we did, and what we could have done better. But also keep in mind that these slides are going to be shared with you, so you can always go back and take a closer look at them if we went too fast on anything.
Yes, in fact, the slides were intentionally developed to be a lasting reference for you because they will be uploaded on a website that Tina will share at least by the time this session is over.
Right.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
All right, so now open it up to questions, I guess.
So we do have a question, and this is from Annabelle Conroy. This is a really great question. This is a little bit difficult in a class of 150 or more. So with large size classes, is there a way to make it easier to grade large numbers?
Well, that's why for the well, no. So for those types of classes, I really go with the multi-select and multiple choice questions. And particularly for formative assessments, I like to do scaffolded ones. So in physics, this is a real problem, right? Physics is a challenge to teach. There's a lot of material. Students often don't have the mathematical skills that they really need. So what we do is I take a physics problem. There's a projectile launched at an angle of 30 degrees from a cliff that's 5 meters tall. It's launched with an initial velocity of 5 meters per second. What's the magnitude and direction of its velocity when it strikes the ground? How far from the base of the cliff does it land? All those kind of things. And so we break it up. So there's part A. Find the x and y components of the initial velocity. And then part B, find the time of flight from the time it takes to go from where it is up and down to the ground. And so it's breaking it up step by step, and then we provide solutions, and we provide wrong answer feedback. So it took a really long time to develop these assessments that have specific wrong answer feedback, like, oh, you forgot to take a square root here when you were solving for the time, or something like that. But it is common mistakes that they make, and you can't catch all of them, but you're getting a lot of them. Another thing that I want to say there is with the multiple choice or multi-select, you're providing an example of the type of response you want them to give. So for example, I want them to have not just a number. I want the number to be in scientific notation. I want it to have the right number of significant digits. I want it to have units on it. And so you're modeling the kind of behavior you want them to see from them on the exam, which might be graded for partial credit or something like that. So that is auto-graded automatically because it's just a Canvas quiz. And so those are the kind of things that you can do in a large classroom. My astronomy class last semester it was online. It had 450 students. And it essentially runs itself, except for office hours and my usual weekly this is what we're doing this week announcements and yellow dig was another thing we do in there. So yeah.
Next question.
Mm-hmm.
To incentivize actually reading the textbook.
Oh, that's a good one.
Well, that wasn't the question. We all went nodding yes.
Yeah. We can only get them to read the book.
Let's read the syllabus first.
Right. Yeah.
I currently give students 3 attempts, and then average their attempts together so that they aren't just trying the quiz and hoping for the best, but hopefully are actually reading the book first. What are your thoughts about taking the highest score on a multi-attempt quiz versus averaging the score versus taking their last attempt? The students hate that I average and just want the highest score. And along with that, Erica Hope said, do we have access to create free Padlets? And I'll answer that on the chat.
Yeah, which is yes. Then, yeah, so I think that averaging them is fine. And you might explain it's only 3 attempts, right? So they can't just increase their average by having an infinite number of attempts and just bring it all the way up. That would be pointless, I think. But having them think authentically about how well they did and reflect on the question without just guessing the first time around and then getting a higher score the next time or something like that. I think it's a good idea. I think I really like that you've done that. And I think that students will push back against it. Something that I do with exams and missed exams, my students push back against, but I think it's the fairest thing to do. I don't drop an exam in my courses, but I excuse 1 missed exam. And so if we have 3 midterm exams and you take all 3, they are averaged together. If you take 2, then 2 of them are averaged together, right? And it's like, well, I want my lowest grade dropped. It's like, well, this person over here was sick on a specific day, right? And they missed this test and they had no control over that. But if you get to take all the tests and then you just drop the lowest one, that's not the same kind of level. That's not the same thing that's happening. So to make it more fair, I say, well, they're all going to be averaged together. They all push back against that. But I think it's the most appropriate thing to do. And we can't always make the students happy. But I think that averaging them together is probably the right thing to do. That's a better strategy towards getting them to think and be more reflective before they just guess. So, yeah.
Thank you. I think that's an excellent answer. Do we have any more questions online?
We don't.
Yeah. So I would like to thank everyone for joining the session today. I would like to provide an important reminder that in this 30-minute sessions with a few minutes of question and answer, we don't dig deep like in any necessarily one seminar. However, some of the challenges and the questions that you had in this session are going to be dealt with more specifically in future sessions because of the in the slides and earlier in this I provided you with the list of some of the topics that we will be addressing, and those do include authentic assessment, multiple selected response types of questions, and integrity in assessment, and a number of the other sort of big issues related around assessment in future seminars.
Thank you.
Getting around to thank yous online too.
Thank you all.
Glad to be here.